The short term. I went fishing about 4 weeks ago, or 3. It was around April. It was hot that day, so I was dressed in shorts and I was walking to the pond. My father used to go fishing with me when I was a child. I used to just help him carry his things around when I was younger. But when I turned 13, I started fishing myself too. It has been a nice way of emptying my mind for me. That's why I was a bit annoyed when I saw some guy standing on the walkway to the pond. He was standing right in the middle of the path and standing as straight as a pole. By then, my irritation vanished when I got closer and I saw his face. On his face, there was a massive smile. I paused, looking behind me to see who he was smiling at, but no, it must have been me. I smiled at him and quickly walked around the weirdo. When I was walking there, I looked back and the guy had turned around and was still smiling at me with that face. I knew that the guy was suspicious and I checked my boat first, but no, it had no holes or anything. So I shrugged and got on. So there I was in the water, fishing and trying to relax, when I heard a crunching sound. I turned and my God, there was that creepy guy again, standing by a tree. By now my feelings were rising. I called to him and asked what was up, my voice shaking, and the guy didn't respond. He just stood there, smiling at me, and I realized that the guy hadn't blinked the whole time. And slowly, moving his hand into his pocket, and slowly, he started moving his hand into his pocket. By now, I just couldn't stand it anymore. I told him to get the hell out of there. The guy snorted, and I grabbed a bottle and tossed it at his face, and it hit his chest. Then he left. I decided that was enough fishing, and I turned and left. I got to the land and was walking away when I heard a person walking behind me. I started running away, and I looked back to see that the creep was chasing me, but now I could see all the whites in his eyes and his whole teeth set. I got to my car and got in, and as I was starting the car, the man pulled out a pointed thing and stabbed at the car's door. I screamed. This only made him laugh harder, and I drove away as fast as I could. I've never gone back to that pond again. I'd only ever gone fishing with my father's big brother a long time ago. Back then, I was a young child and super skinny and energetic, and so my father believed I wouldn't like it. So he didn't want me to go there and tried to make me stay, but his big brother pushed for it because he liked me, and so we went together. I remember I was so excited when I arrived there that I broke a piece of my uncle's carb. I didn't tell him though. As we were unpacking in the car, my uncle gave me this box, which was so big that I held it with both my arms. But as we were walking to the pond, I noticed this big black truck parked there, and although the car was super tinted, I absolutely saw the guy inside there was staring at me. We were fishing for a while, and surprisingly, I was really enjoying it. I found the bouncing off the water to be relaxing. My uncle said he knew I'd like it, and at some point I got hungry. He told me that there was food back in the car, and I really didn't want to go, but my uncle promised me that I wouldn't miss anything, and so I went. I was standing at the door of the house and eating from the lunchbox when a shadow fell over me. I looked behind me and I saw a man in his shorts wearing sunglasses. He smiled down at me and asked what was my name. But the look on his face was honestly terrifying. I told him, and when I was done, he put his hand on my shoulder and said I was going home with him. I said I had to go ask my uncle. His smile widened and he grabbed me and pulled me up. He put his hand on my mouth and the guy closed the door with his butt. But then I beat into him and the guy screamed. I ran away from there and he chased me for a while. I knew he'd find me, but as I was running, I looked back and I saw that he was a distance away behind me. He'd given up and he went to the cars. When I reached my uncle, I was crying like a baby. I told him everything and he was so angry. He went to look for the guy, but the guy was already gone. I kind of regretted telling my uncle though, because he stopped fishing and we spent the whole day calling the police and hunting down the man. The cops drilled me so many times about the guy, and I'm sure I gave many wrong answers. That was truly messed up. The Wiper. This happened at around 2009. It was early morning at the time, and the dragonflies were still hovering over the water when I parked. It was a pretty beautiful sight, and I enjoyed it as I was walking to the water. There were about 3 cars either than mine, but the one that caught my attention was the black one parked by the trees. A guy stood in front of the car, smoking a cigarette and walking around looking jittery. His hands kept twitching and he kept wiping the back of his neck. Also, he kept running to the other cars and looking through the windows. Then he'd go back to his own. I would have asked what was up, but he suddenly turned to look at me, as if caught. I smiled at him, but he didn't smile back. I gave a small wave, but still he didn't wave back. Feeling kinda awkward, I decided to just go on. I looked back again when I was far enough, and I saw that the man had run around the tree to stand there and look at me. There was a look in his eye at that moment that really didn't sit well with me. I checked for the pepper spray. It was there. So a few hours later, I'd forgotten about the man, and I was fishing and listening to music when I heard the water rippling behind me. I turned, and there was the guy. He was looking the other way, but his boat was slowly drifting towards me. I called him politely at first, but he didn't turn. Feeling a bit uncomfortable, I called again, but the guy didn't turn. By now, I was just so creeped out, I yelled at him, and still he didn't turn. His boat hit the side of mine, and I waited, horrified about what he'd do to me. He turned around, showing the shit-eating grin on his face. "Now it's just you and me," he said, and he was pulling something shiny from inside his coat, but I wouldn't let him. "And this pepper spray," I said, and sprayed the pepper spray on his face. The guy screamed and fell back on his boat to avoid any more damage, and I took the time to steer away and get out of the water. He stayed on his boat, writhing in pain, and I was gone. The Cruncher. I was out fishing a long time ago, before I'd gotten married. I was on the pond and waiting for a catch when I heard a crunching sound. I thought I must have stepped on something and ignored it. A few moments later, I heard a tree branch breaking, and I looked for the tree branch, but I couldn't find it. It was only as the boat steered that I spotted an oddly shaped branch in the woods. I looked closer and realized that wasn't a branch. It was a man, peering around the trees. He was hidden there silently, watching me, waiting. I didn't know what he was waiting for, and I was fine with it. So slowly I steered myself back to land, and I got off. I didn't even tie the boat properly, and I started walking back to the car. Then I heard rustling. I looked and saw there was the guy, running through the forest. He was running to my car. I let him run as fast as he wanted. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called the constable. When I arrived there, they had the guy in the back of their car. The constable told me that it was a good thing I called them, and he said the man had a gun. He had been a suspect they'd been looking for a while now, and that was how that trip ended. The Goner. I don't really fish myself, but we have a massive river running past my home, and most mornings when I'm going to school, I will often see men standing there and fishing for something. On the other day, I'd gone to a friend's house. Well, to be honest, she wasn't really a friend, and my mother didn't want me hanging around her, so when I heard the rain coming, I ran back home. I knew my clothes would be wet, and my mother would ask me where I was, but that didn't help. The rain hit me anyway, and so I'd given up at that point and was just running home so I don't get more wet than necessary. And it was then that I heard what sounded like crying. I paused and turned to see that there was a man standing at the very edge of the river, and his shoulders shook violently. My immediate thought was, oh God, this guy is going to commit suicide. I called to him again and again while I tried to get closer to him. The guy's shaking stopped, and I started speaking softer to him. I asked him what was his name, but then I noticed that he had a type of box next to him, and I looked and saw the line in his hand. The man was fishing. He was fishing out here in the pouring rain. I was going to ask him to never mind, but the guy slowly turned around, and I've often wondered if what I saw was because of the heavy rain or it was just I was so tired. I don't know, but all I know is when I think back to that moment, what I saw in that man's eyes when he turned, they were black. His eyes were black all the way around, even the whites. I screamed my soul out, and the man hurried over to me, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned and ran the hell out of there. I dashed into my house and slammed the door. Then I looked at the window, and I saw the guy standing outside the gates of our home and looking at me quietly. He then turned and he walked away. It was truly the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. The most terrifying thing ever. The Attempter. I went fishing once with my sister's boyfriend. The guy never liked me, and I didn't like him either. Nobody likes him in my family. My parents forbade my sister from dating the guy a long time ago, but she wouldn't listen, and she went back to him after barely a year of not dating him. And I lived with my sister in her apartment, so I could see it. But my sister told me that if I told my parents, she'd kick me out, and so I had to bear with the guy. But he confused me once when he suggested that I go out fishing with him. My sister was happy about that, and I think she was under the impression we were going to bond or something. So there we were, packing up the things in the car. He asked me, how has school been? And I couldn't believe it. He was really trying to pretend like nothing existed between us. But not wanting to be the one who spoiled things, I told him that it's fine. And he said, I thought he'd be quiet, but he suddenly said, yeah, well, things are looking very good for me and the family too. I just couldn't believe it. He was really trying to be conversational with me. He spent the rest of the drive there with him talking at me and laughing at his own jokes. He seemed to be in a good mood. We arrived at the water, and when I struggled to carry the things, he told me, let me get that for you, and he carried them. He was still smiling as we were getting on the boat and humming to himself. We started into the water, and I looked out at the green lake, and at some point, the man's humming must have stopped. About 5 minutes later, I noticed we weren't stopping. Even though we were far enough now, I looked up at him, and my heart sank. The smile was still on his face, but his eyes were full of hate. I asked what he was doing, and he said, why don't you find out, you little bitch? And he grabbed me by my arms. I screamed and told him he was hurting me, but he didn't care. He tossed me over the edge and into the water. I tried to swim out, but he grabbed my shoulders and pushed me deeper. I was sure I was going to die, but just then, he pulled me out of the water and put me on the boat, while saying something I couldn't hear. After coughing out all the snot in my body, I realized he wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to another boat nearby. I was just trying to save her, he kept saying. I got up and yelled, help! Help me! Help! And the boat next to us had this Asian family in it. It was all boys, the father and his sons. While my sister's boyfriend tried to defend himself, They pulled me on their boat and they took me back to land. The elder son was 19, and so he could drive me home, and he also didn't seem to mind. It was because of their help that my sister believed me, and she finally dumped that guy.